Welcome, everyone, to episode 1 of the We're Not Lost Private Podcast. I'm Joe. That's Leighton. Just a couple of regular guys who are going to talk some World War II history with you. So, Leighton, what you been getting into the last few weeks or so?
Um, Thanks for the intro, Joe. Obviously, very nervous. So this is for a lot of people, probably seen on camera for the first time in a while, whether I'm normally hiding away with We a Happy Few. But um, obviously, what people don't know is I do currahee signings and try not to plug, but that's taken up a bit of my time recently with getting stuff across to Shane Taylor, who plays the lovely Doc Rowe, or the incredible Doc Rowe in Band of Brothers, but then also now preparing for Rick Warden, who plays Harry Welsh, which I'm also excited about doing. But obviously, with that in mind, I'm also really excited to say that I've got somebody from Masters of the Air have agreed to do a signing. So when that kicks off, we'll certainly jump in and get that posted on who that will be. And I like to think people will be very excited about who that is as well. But in terms of that, off to Bastogne on the weekend. So looking forward to going back there again because it's a fantastic place to visit. But yeah, what about you, Joe?
Um, Yeah, well, first, let's cover a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. In the notes section for the video, you'll find all of our social media contact information, our email. If you want to submit questions for us that we can address in a later date, maybe answer some stuff for you, please feel free to use all those. We will have a Patreon account set up for those who want to be supporters of the podcast and help us keep the lights on. We're going to have things like photos and reference documents and bits and pieces of video, maybe on-site stuff that Leighton records when he's in Bastogne, or if any of us take a trip and we want to go there, we'll have that stuff available for our supporters. But for me, I think the biggest thing happened in December of last year, early on. The wife and I took a trip over to Germany and Belgium. We did a lot of tracing of into Belgium from Germany, following the advance of the German forces during the Battle of the Bulge. We kind of bridged between Manteuffel's army and Dietrich's army. Spent a lot of time on the trail of Kampfgruppe Peiper, visiting a lot of those well-known and well-photographed locations. Did a bunch of now and those thens. Some of those will be available in our for our Patreon supporters if they want to take a look at them. It was pretty amazing to be on that ground, and the weather was uncooperative. Let's put it that way. Um, Raining, snowing, you name it. I was sloshing around in a lot of fields. My poor wife sitting in the car looking at me while I'm trying to do now and then photos, going, "Why did I marry this guy again?" Like,
So,
but
Joe, jumping in there then, when did you go to Bastogne or to Belgium?
we went. This is probably my, I don't know how many times I've been over in that this is the first time I went up into the central sector. I'm sorry, the northern sector.
Mhm.
Most of the time when I go over, I spend my time in the central sector, which is obviously focused around the Bastogne fight and that. So this was my first time going up into that neck of the woods. Some of it is the setup for future tours that I put on with my buddy David. Um, and you can we'll have those links available as well if you're interested in taking a tour. We do a full length 2 week Easy Company tour in September. And then we have contract tours where if you want a private tour, we can set up a tour to visit the things you want to do. But we left in early December. So it was the 1st through the 9th we were traveling.
Oh,
And then we did a bunch of Christmas markety stuff
of
because
course.
I didn't want my wife rioting that she got stuck just staring at muddy fields for 9 days. So but
That's amazing. But the fact that you said it's really snowy, I was there a week later and there was no snow to be seen. So I went to the Nuts Festival with Matthew Leach and we saw nothing, no snow at all. It was incredibly mild. I was really surprised of how many layers I wasn't wearing to a degree. Obviously I saw your photos on Facebook and unbelievable. They were amazing. I think you went to Lanzarote.
we did do
I think
Lanzarote and it was
amazing.
completely socked in.
Wow.
Um, and I had a 4-wheel drive vehicle and I was worried about getting stuck on the
That's on a
back
hill,
road
isn't it?
heading, huh?
That's on a little bit of a hill, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
There's a
And
little bit of a gradient at least anyway.
but it was so beautiful too. And you walk up the trail and it's out the backside of the town, obviously where the tree line is, where the INR platoon of the 394th was up in is there. But it is so peaceful and so quiet. And you had this light snowfall. happening around you. Unfortunately, it kind of inhibits your ability to see much of the monument, but it gave you this weird time warp effect, and it was just very cool to be there and see it in somewhat in the conditions that would have been back in 44.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, silly question, but have you read the book by Alex Kershaw?
I have. In fact, in preparing to go over there, I read both Alex's and I read John Eisenhower's Bitter Woods, which was excellent as well.
I've got that and I've not read it yet. I mean, I bought that straight after
Shame,
finishing. I know.
shame.
I bought that immediately after reading The Longest Winter by Alex Kershaw. And because obviously that was an incredible book. And he's an incredible writer as well. I mean, certainly Bedford Boys being, wow, what a book straight away. I mean, I
Yeah,
think again, I bought,
and because I was going there to do all of this stuff too, I layered on Peter Caddick Adams' Snow and Steel, which is excellent too.
so
So I mean, there was a lot of reading going on. Let's put it that way. I did
I never,
carry Bitter Woods around with me while I was there
oh,
too,
wow.
so I had it. So I had as a reference when I wanted to go back and pick an action apart or something, or
Oh,
look at
really?
what was going on.
Because that was they used that as a bit of a, I want to say, inspiration for The Longest Winter, wasn't it? It's sort of the chap who helped, what's his name? Was he the lieutenant of the platoon? Oh, I
Yeah,
can't.
Lieutenant Bauk. Yeah,
Didn't
yeah.
he help with
He helped John Eisenhower. Yeah, he was Eisenhower was the first one to really do the deep dive, and then Alex got in there and interviewed not only um, Bauk, but he interviewed a number of the surviving members of the platoon. So, I mean, it's really um, there's a big debate though with how many casualties they caused. You know, I went in it with a clear mind in terms of what I thought they could do because having been a combat veteran, I can when I get on terrain, I start looking at things a little bit differently. Like my wife
hmm
is just looking at this beautiful wood line and all this snow, and I'm sitting there going, well, my machine guns are positioned there. I've got these avenues covered. And when you look at it and you look at how difficult it would have been for the Germans to assault their position, and by and large, the Fallschirmjäger unit they were going up against were mostly repurposed Luftwaffe personnel. So they only had a small amount of infantry training,
Wow.
and then they are thrown into this hectic battle, and then they finally figure out, hey, we have to flank the position out to
hmm
be able to take it out because they do a number of frontal assaults,
Yeah.
and the amount
That's,
of
that's
casualties waffles depending on who you talk to. But
amazing.
at the end of the day, it's just an amazing piece of ground, and it's just one. It's in a great indicator of how these little small bands of U.S. troops that when they did hold, they threw the German timeline completely off axis, and no pun intended. And really, that's what allows the American army to recover
hmm
and counterattack and
Yep.
crush the offensive. So, I mean, to me, it's just this perfect indicator, this perfect indicative. This incident's indicative of these little small bands of guys fighting and holding off over overwhelming odds many times. Another one was like Parker's Crossroads. I highly recommend if you're interested in learning about the stories of the men, not these big arrows on a map. And you and I have talked about this, and we'll probably touch on it when we talk about Tobruk in a little bit. That's what really draws the interest of, I think, of most of the people that we end up interacting with. You and I
hmm
both talk to people, and when we talk to them, it's because it relates to somebody they may have known,
hmm
their grandfather or their great uncle or somebody like that in their family that they knew they may not have gotten a chance to talk to, but knew they were involved in the war.
Yeah.
It makes it relatable for folks like us, and I think that's why probably band has such a universal appeal to people, because especially because it's visualized in the miniseries that people can associate to it, and that's probably a theme we're going to come back to quite
hmm
often over the length of however long the pod series lasts.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean that
that's why it's so popular a topic nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we sort of know each other as well, sort of how, because obviously you're an American, I'm a Brit or a Welshman, as I like to be called. Um, but people are probably thinking, how the hell do these two know each other? Well, it's through Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
First off the bat, I've loved the series since it first aired in 2001. I was 19 years old, probably 6 months before I joined the Air Force. I think it came out 6, 7 months, and completely I was already inspired to join the Air Force anyway, but certainly implemented more of a drive for me to sort of be part of something bigger than myself. Or not necessarily say it was for Queen and Country, probably more that I didn't want to work in a factory because I didn't have many qualifications growing up, but it was also a route, to something bigger than myself really, and go overseas and serve, which I had the honor of doing. Honor, pleasure, privilege. I don't know
Depending on
how
how you
long.
look at it.
Yeah. I
Depends
mean,
on
not quite.
experiences may vary.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite tip of the spear like yourself, combat veteran, but certainly um tasty, I wouldn't say tasty situations, but potentially tasty situations in terms of being beyond the main operating base in Afghanistan for us Brits, and sort of get involved out there. So yeah, it's something I always wanted to do. And you probably could, all these war films that we watched as kids growing up, and certainly Band of Brothers as well. I mean, I devoured that when it came out. I don't know about you, Joe, but yeah,
Yeah, I think
certainly.
for me, being a little bit older than you, so I was a 30-year-old Marine when here in the States when a band first aired, and then 9/11 kicked off. So that basically kicked off like 2 years of almost constant movement and deployments and training exercises and stuff where I felt like I didn't, see my family very often. But I grew up. One of the things my father and I love to do is around Veterans Day or Memorial Day over here in the States, and I would assume it's kind of similar over there. They run like your war movies marathons on those days, and our favorites to watch together were The Longest Day and Kelly's Heroes for World War II. Those are two of my favorites, and
Oh,
then
really?
one of my favorites, which I don't think my father enjoyed as much because it's a bit more serious bent to it. Although Longest Day is a fairly serious movie, it does have its moments of levity in it. But I particularly loved The Big Red One when I was growing up.
I've not seen that. Mark
Um,
Hamill.
Mark
Mark
Hamill,
Hamlin.
yeah, and being a big Star Wars fan as well as a kid, you're like, oh, hey, Mark Hamill, and then you watch this movie, and it's such a statement. Like the for those of you who are familiar with the Big Red One, I mean, you know, if you've done some research on it, the four horsemen of the four main characters besides Lee Marvin, they're meant to be facets of Sam Fuller's personality. They're not meant to be based on any one person. It is one person, but it's four men representing one man. So
Got
to
you.
me, once I finally learned that, I thought it was just a masterpiece, despite all of the Israeli Shermans that were being used as panzers and stuff like that. Once you get past that and look to the deeper messaging in the movie, I thought it was just a marvelous piece of movie making.
Here's one
Plus,
for you then,
Plus,
Joe. So talk.
it gave you another alternate look at the invasion beaches, especially looking at North Africa and Italy, Sicily, Italy, which was pretty new to me then as a young guy watching this stuff. But yeah,
Mm,
band became I wouldn't say it was an obsession. I just The book had been on the commandant's reading list for young. As you're a Marine, each pay grade has a different tier of books on it that's recommended reading or some of it's mandatory reading. And Band was on there, and my mother had gotten it for me. And I carried a copy of Band all over Iraq in 2003 when I was there. It was in my rucksack. It was with me all the time, downtime, because in '03 we didn't have proliferated internet the way we do now in the service, where everybody even brings phones and
mhm.
GoPros and all kinds of other crap into combat with them. We didn't have that luxury. We communicated with family the same way they did in World War II, snail mail.
Yeah.
So, uh,
Yeah.
but
Even when I
yeah,
was in,
band it became like, and it was universal. Like my unit, we would gather in our tent in the evenings and use our projector. We had a projector. I worked in an intelligence shop, and we had a projector for doing briefings. Well, we would hook up the DVD player and play Band on a sheet on the side of the tent inside, obviously in case there's a sandstorm. Um, and just what really culminated the apex of that was that about 10 days before we got sent into our cantonment area to launch, well, basically we put into isolation before we launched, we had started watching it. So we literally watched an episode a night until the last episode aired right before we left to go to our staging areas. So um, pretty amazing time. And then I end up exchanging letters with Major Winters while I was out there, and
Phenomenal.
started a long relationship with the men of Easy Company. But yeah, I think we've waxed poetically enough about
Yeah,
our motivations and where our interests are, and how Easy and band will be a part of
yeah.
this pod.
And I
Um,
think you raised a really good point there, Joe, about with the big red one, how four people were represented as one. And what we'll overcoming episodes of this, depending on how successful we are, is we'll see that with Band of Brothers. And I mean, coming back onto that with Band of Brothers, I remember watching Band of Brothers, watched the series, got the DVD, and then I came across a copy of the book when I was in the RAF, my first unit. I was bored. I was looking in the communal storage cupboard for something, I don't know what, and I came across a bag of books, and then there was Band of Brothers. And I remember picking out, going back to my room and devouring it, and I read it at least twice. But what I came across was what you just said then is I remember reading the book and coming across certain members of Easy Company going, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's more than 20 men in Easy Company. Who are these people? Oh, in the show, it was so and so who did that. Oh, it was so and so who did that.
yeah.
Oh, well, that's what that guy is. So, like I says, some of the what we see on the series is, say done by Luz or Lipton or whoever, is actually done by somebody else. But they've obviously just brought them into one person for
Yeah, and
ease of story. Right?
I think over time we're going to do quite a bit of myth busting. We started some of it when I guested on We Happy Few 506 with you guys, and we'll continue doing that stuff. Especially, I mean, this is a huge year. There's so many 80th anniversaries this year. We'll try and do some synchronized reviews of episodes for folks, so they'll get a little bit more behind the curtains with the actual miniseries and the real men. Like you said, there are so many guys that are in the book too that weren't mentioned, and there's so many guys that weren't mentioned in the book either. And I think one of the things we'll be able to do is shine a light on some of those lesser known members of the company. Um,
Yeah,
and
sounds good.
I mean, like you said, the idea is we're going to have guests come on periodically if we can arrange for them. Folks that have worked, school trained historians and authors, actors and film industry folks, family members of servicemen that want to come on and talk about their veteran. I think that there'll be a little something for everything in these pods as we go forward.
Yeah,
And and not to do a radical change in the topic, but I think if we don't start getting towards Tobruk soon, this might
I
end up
know. Yeah.
running about 3 hours. So one of the things that you and I talked about was looking at this on this date type of thing where we kind of review sort of the World War II almanac and look for specific events that happened. And I know when I got to the January of 1941 portion of one of the books I like to reference, um, I noticed a few things that stuck out. And I'm sure you did too when you were doing your research for the show. And there were quite a few things in 41 that really they popped out to me. And I think the first one was the ABC1 conferences begin. And to me, they're significant because they happen well in advance of Pearl Harbor, um,
Yep.
where ABC, also referred to as the American British Conversations, they begin in January and they run through March, and it's a series of 14 different meetings between um, our two countries where they discuss the possible strategy going forward. And it's really there where the genesis of the Germany First strategy starts to take hold amongst the two countries. Lots of other things are discussed in that, like how to deal with the Far East and Japan and some of the topics du jour at the
Yep.
time. But really, the big one, I think, the tentpole that comes out of that is the Germany is the bigger, wider threat. Um,
Europe first. Looking at this,
yeah,
obviously, Joe, you threw this at me either this morning or last night.
yeah,
So obviously having a quick look, yeah. So what you just said then, Europe first, that sort of the groundwork, the grand strategy is what I'm seeing here. Is that
yeah, yeah. It lays it, and then coming on the heels of that is the first pitch of the Lend-Lease policy to the American lawmakers by FDR, which obviously sets as far as I'm concerned, the moment they release Lend-Lease sets us on a collision course with especially with Germany, because basically they explain Lend-Lease to U.S. lawmakers is any country that the U.S. has a vested interest in, that has a vested interest in our defense, we're going to assist in terms of supplying them with the means to resist. So that's the early. It hasn't been passed yet. I think it's March of 41 they finally pass it. But
Yeah.
again, that sets us on that collision course, right? With Germany,
Mhm.
is the U.S. says obviously you guys, the UK had been at war with Germany prior to, and then in terms of Easy Company, did you want to pop in that one big one, the one big anniversary?
Oh, for today.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's obviously it's yeah, Dick Witness's birthday today.
yeah.
His heavenly, people say, heavenly birthday. But yeah, Dick Winters was born on this day in, Joe, you'll have to give me the year because my
Oh,
mind is going.
I think it's complete. Well, I think it's completely apropos, by the way, that we're recording on his birthday, even though we're going to release on the 31st. So, I think that's
Yeah.
we did not plan that, folks. That just happened to work
No.
out that way. And then with the 80th coming up for D-Day, I thought it was interesting too. A couple of days ago was the 80th anniversary of the first recce of Omaha Beach by the COP, or the Combined Operations Pilotage Parties. These were run at a little two-man X-20 subs. They would ground near the shore, conduct reconnaissance, and take soil samples so that they could go back and inform whether or not that stretch of beach would be able to support the landings. And they start in the
Amazing.
Colville-Sumer area, and they work their way towards Vireville, Sumer, and then the Les Moulins draw, which is one of the primary draws coming off of Omaha Beach. And obviously, that's a huge development. And if I remember correctly, the two men that do the reconnoitering of that of Omaha, Logan Scott Bowden and Bruce Ogden Smith,
Mhm.
they end up briefing Omar Bradley personally. And
Wow.
if I remember from Peter Adams' Sand and Steel, if I'm remembering correctly, so they go from sitting on the bottom of the ocean off of Omaha to briefing Bradley soon after. So that pretty amazing uh, to think that was happening now. Actually, a few days ago, 80 years ago. But yeah, that's we'll do this as we do the pods. We'll try and do on these dates kind of things and try and have them synchronized to special events.
Great idea.
But I think the big one that we've spent quite a bit of time in researching, so we could at least sound semi-intelligent. Again,
Semi.
to preface, we're not experts on a lot of these
No.
topics. We're learning. Hopefully, you're learning as you watch us. If we stumble, I'm sure some of us, you'll let us know how dumb we are, but we're doing the best we can because we want to learn, and we want to have a discussion, and we want people to be involved in those discussions. So, um,
Yeah.
you want to kick off, or you want to just do an overview? Like,
Oh God. I mean, I've had to do some speed reading on Tobruk.
so
Um,
you want me to just give a
I'm gonna pass
geographical
on.
reference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
So
let's that.
so obviously
Um,
Tobruk is a deep water port in on the northeastern coast of Libya. It is a crescent-shaped port, and it's vital for maintaining supplies coming in and out of the area. Um, and predating the actual seizing of Tobruk from the Italians were battles like Sidi Barini and Bardia, where the Italian forces really whittled down. General O'Connor, commanding the Western Desert Force, um, Richard O'Connor, his forces just continually battering the Italians back. And they're battered to the point of they go from having about 10 divisions down to a single division, the Sirte division, which ends up manning the defenses. Well, it's the primary unit manning the defenses. Is supplemented by a number of smaller units and artillery units. They're commanded by Enrico Patassi Manella. He has about 25,000 troops, somewhere about 250 or so. That's approximation. Artillery pieces, both medium and light artillery, and about 60 tanks, mostly light tank designs. The L335 and M11 39 and the M1340, which is a newer tank, which is funny if you've seen the slick for the show, you'll see a couple of those, obviously captured by the Australians because they got the ruse painted on the side of them, which I thought was hysterical. Is part of the reason why I used that photo for the advertisement. Um, and that sets the stage for the battle. And O'Connor's continuing to move his forces west through Egypt and towards Tobruk. Um, and he's for this particular battle, he's designated the UK's seventh Armored Division and the Sixth Australian Division, plus a couple of machine gun battalions and a number of field artillery units. The defenses are kind of concentric. There's a series of strong point fortifications um, around the Tobruk port, with minefields and barbed wire strung around them. And Manila positions his artillery to support and his machine guns to support those strong points. But what they do is create gaps in the coverage of the line around, and the British are going to take advantage of this once the battle kicks off. But I thought it was interesting when I was doing my research at the run-ups to it, and you and I talked about this before the show went live. There's this piece where British leadership and the Australian leadership feel like not morale, but discipline is kind of suffering a little bit. They're kind of a little bit drunk on their success, and guys are starting to act a little squirrely. And I love this portion in the Australians' official history where they talk about senior officers being worried about what's described as a picnic spirit. Civilianism is beginning to break out. There was complaints of promiscuous firing of rifles and exploding bombs, and dressing in articles of Italian uniform like clowns and not like soldiers. The collecting of dogs and looking after dogs instead of men, and fraternization with prisoners. We must keep our heads and maintain perspective and poise. If we do not, we shall quickly lose efficiency and slip to the level of the foe we are hoping to defeat. And when I read that, I couldn't stop laughing.
So
I mean,
with that, then the Australians, was that so they were commanded by Major General Leslie Morsehead.
yeah,
Am I right in that one? And
more, yeah,
he was quite an aggressive. He had an aggressive style of command as
yeah. And
well.
this is the first battle of the Australians will be the primary assaulting force. This is a huge battle for them, and it's when you go back and look at their history of it, um, they were at a very point of pride for them, and it
Hmm.
should be because it's the first time where they're the lead assault element, and they really do a fine job getting in there. And we can talk about that as we talk about the
Absolutely.
battle kicking off.
I mean, yeah, there was a VC, obviously clearly in the battle, and there was a VC from that as well. I came across with Jack Edmondson, so being the
Mhm.
first one. So I did get the dates of that, and from my notes, obviously there's a lot of notes because I've had to do a lot of reading on this. I missed that, but
Yeah,
yeah, that's certainly around this time frame or near enough. Obviously, yeah, the first VC, and again, he was involved in some very very heavy fighting, some hand to
yeah,
hand combat,
yeah.
and he was more.
Yep. With that in mind, so the attack was originally supposed to kick off, I believe, on the 19th, but O'Connor postponed it a day because there was some really bad dust storms. But also, he was trying to reposition some of his artillery to provide coverage. Now, the Italians had divided up the perimeter defense into sectors, and O'Connor positions the Seventh Armored near the western sector because he wants that to be the feint.
Mhm.
Even though they only have, I want to say, about in total like 16 or 18 Matilda tanks available for that for the Australians portion of the assault. He wanted the Seventh Armored to be kind of that feint, and the Australians would hit the eastern sector, the south side of the eastern sector. And I think his VC comes from when they finally penetrate the wire. Um, I think the Italians didn't understand, and I don't think Manila understood how inferior his artillery was.
Mhm.
um, the British artillery units and the had much more standoff range, so they could lay back and shell and essentially siege
Yeah.
um, the Italian positions, and the Italian field guns could not range to conduct counter battery fire. And also, I thought was interesting when I was reading, you start to see the combined arms mentality start to take hold with the British in that they use their bombing force effectively. Like O'Connor requests air support, and they bomb with medium bombers the entire port area and the defenses. And they attack the Italian Navy ship, the San Gregorio, which is in the port at the time, which is also part of the Italians' artillery defense, their indirect fire defense
Mhm.
system. So you start to see, and this will develop over time over the course of World War II, where the Allies start and they're not very good at combined
Mhm.
arms. They're not good at using air support to support a ground campaign. And the British really come to the forefront of that. They put a
Yeah.
tactical Air Force group that distributes officers that can call for fire properly. And this is copied by the Americans as well, and comes to great effect after the Normandy landings,
Yeah.
as become, ripping across France. But it's here that, like, the Germans really start to fear Allied air power. But it's great to see that it takes hold here in Tobruk, where O'Connor basically wields it like another arm
Mhm.
of his force. He's like, he has them crater the whole area
Yeah.
before the assault begins.
So with that, then you haven't said who O'Connor is. Not that I picked up. So that's
Oh,
General Richard O'Connor.
Richard O'Connor, yeah,
So he fought in World War I. So he's going to have some experience of land warfare from his time there. And he was commanding the Western Desert Force. So in North Africa. So obviously, for people who listen, O'Connor. So that's who Joe is referring to. So he has got experience in this field. So of the use of artillery and infantry, certainly with World War I, the trenches. And there's some really interesting stuff about O'Connor, that he got captured just a few months later. So
yeah. If
that's another
if
story.
if anybody is a fan of the World at War documentary series, um, if you watch the episode on North Africa, they actually interview General O'Connor, and he talks about getting captured by a German reconnaissance patrol.
Brilliant.
So there's a nice reference there for those of our viewers and listeners that are fans of the World at War. You probably already saw it, and you probably remember him. Very highly decorated, and if I recall correctly, knighted as
Yes.
well post-war.
And
Um,
he contributed to as well the Rommel book. So obviously a copy I've used as a bit of a reference. This first edition I picked up in London over a year ago. So he was used for that as well, to obviously give his insights, because Rommel comes into this later on.
yeah,
But yeah, so yeah, that's who Richard O'Connor is. And yeah, he got captured, became a POW for over 2 years. Um, and obviously involved in the Normandy invasion, but he landed 5 days after D-Day.
I believe so. Yeah,
So yeah, highly decorated, highly experienced. So it's no surprise there that when you talk about that and what he was using this other arm to batter the Italians, and with this, they literally decimated the Italians. Is that right, Joe? They sort of
yeah.
they were close to
This
falling.
Yeah, combine that with the artillery preparation fire that goes on the 20th, beginning at about 0540 hours, I believe. Um, the artillery fire does a few things. It punches some holes in the wire, but obviously the sappers will do the heavy lifting, getting in there and making the cuts through the draws through the wire. But the key, besides inflicting casualties and making breaks in the wire, the key effect of the artillery fire is it severs a lot of the landline communication system. The Italians don't have a lot of field pack radios, and the ones they have are not very reliable. So they use a series of phone line connected communications, and a lot of those are severed. So Manila is basically rendered blind for the first few hours of the fight. So he can't react to what's going on on the battlefield in front of him, because he has no idea that the Aussies are now approaching the first apron of wire, and they start to make their cuts. And I believe Edmonds is involved in that. Once they break through the wire, they start to fan out and start taking down the strong points, and they also are able to funnel um, Matilda 2 tanks through that break in the wire too. And what was fortuitous also about the postponement for a day, O'Connor is able to get a few of his tanks back out of the workshop, so he gets a few more Matilda's at his disposal for the attack, and they start to fan out and start taking out the strong points and just blossoming out from this opening in the wire. And it's very nasty, dirty fighting on the trench lines. A lot of hand-to-hand close quarters battle, a lot of grenade and stand and rifle work at close range. Not for the faint of heart, obviously. And Manila has no idea that the wire's been breached, the trench lines are breached. He's got tanks rumbling around in his defensive wire aprons and starting to take down his strong points. And the short of it is the garrison falls in about 2 days. He suffers over 2,000 casualties. The Allied force suffers about 400. But really, the bonus is the amount of stores uh, that are captured. That one, they are able to open up the port. The San Gregorio is scuttled. They open up the port. They seize the stores, which fuel more of the advance, and um, it sets up for the following campaign, which is a long, arduous Tobruk campaign that weighs heavily, especially on Churchill as it goes on, right up to the point that the garrison eventually falls. But you did a lot more of the reading on the post action, didn't you? You were
Yeah,
telling me, but there's some consequences that come from the garrison falling. Like there's a reaction from the Germans,
yeah,
right? Because it's just the Italians right now. But once
yeah,
once the garrison falls, and this is where you started doing a lot of research, where you read
yeah,
way further out than I did.
yeah. Sort of. I think I was trying to find stuff, and I just didn't know where to start. So I started, yeah, that this sort of what I read and watched as well, because there's some great documentaries on YouTube for this, and speed reading, speed watching, as they say, is yeah, the Italians were close to crumbling, and Hitler didn't see. This is what I read, so don't shoot the messenger, or if I've misinterpreted it wrong, please don't crucify me on the
We're
internet.
learning. We're learning.
Um, Hitler saw Africa as a sort of second campaign, as a secondary campaign. He wasn't really interested in it. Um, that's fine. He probably wanted, sort of my interpretation of that is he wanted to sort of conquer mainland Europe, and Africa was by the by in that sense. Leave it to the Italians. But with the Italians falling, that could potentially leave the Germans vulnerable. So he sent down the Africa Corps, obviously with Rommel commanding, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, uh, probably one of the best Hitler had in terms of commanders. And yeah, so let me get this right. Obviously, I'm trying to read my notes, my doctor's handwriting notes, but Rommel came down. He probably assessed the situation. Um, this is late March. I can't recall the date, so it's called a late March, to devise a plan, send it to the senior leadership for approval, and which, by it was sort of again late April, probably a month, just almost a month later after his arrival in the area. And obviously then, the I suppose the bureaucracy of it all, sort of being analyzed, ripped apart, amended, as any senior leadership does with anything, certainly in the military, which could take weeks. So they were planning his counterattack or counter-offensive, or his operations to take place probably 2 months later, maybe longer. 9 days.
Yeah.
9 days. He was on the
Yeah.
move to
Yeah,
go
he
for Tobruk.
basically lands and says, "I'm going to go on the attack." I
Yeah.
think, and it sets up. Obviously, there's a lot of seesaw battling there. But to cue off your comment about the how the Germans viewed the North Africa campaign, it was like a kind of a backwater almost. And I think that one of the things that always stood out to me, especially watching a lot of those documentaries, like probably some of the same ones you watched, was when you see a video of the columns of whether they're German or Commonwealth vehicles, how many captured vehicles are interspersed in the columns, and that was a direct result of the fact that one, it was difficult to get men and machinery into the theater because of the interdiction of both sides on the other one's shipping and transport. Um, and two, every vehicle being valuable in a desert environment. It's unlike when you think about Normandy and the Bocage and fighting, where it's a real slugfest. You can't see beyond the next field, whereas you can see for miles and miles and miles, and you would cover miles and miles and miles in an advance, and you need to be mechanized in that environment. And that's why there was such a premium put on recovering enemy vehicles and putting them back into service, or your own vehicles, especially. Um, I remember in that same documentary, that same episode on World at War, where they talked about a couple of the British veterans talking about how good the Germans were about recovering their vehicles and getting them back into service. And that's because they had so few of them. It comes to a head near the end of the campaign when you look at the amount of panzers that are available just before Rommel heads home, and then the Africa Corps has to fold, and then the German forces as a whole fold. There's so few panzers left in that corps, and something else that you talked about. I always like to read the man in the ring type books.
Hmm.
And when I was in Afghanistan, I was in Kandahar Airfield for a while, and one of the headquarters buildings I worked in had kind of a pseudo library where you could either borrow books or you could take one, leave one. And when I was a young Marine, you could go into any PX in the States or any shopette, and they would have racks of these paperback books. And it seemed to be in vogue at the time in the early 90s that every soldier who had served in Vietnam in a long-range reconnaissance patrol unit or a ranger unit, or a Marine that served in a recon or a force recon unit, had written a paperback book about his experiences. So I usually carried anywhere from 2 to 6 of these things with me, and because you could put it in a little Ziploc bag and put it in your cargo pocket in your
Yeah.
uniform in your pants, and you'd have instant entertainment when you had some downtime. And so I remember going um, into that one of that library, and one of the first books I grabbed was this one um, about Guadalcanal. Very
Uh-huh.
interesting book. It's reminded me of Full Metal Jacket, in that like half the book is about going through boot camp, and the other half is fighting in Guadalcanal. But the other book that I grabbed and I ended up returning, which I wish I didn't, because I really loved it, was called Brazen Chariots by Robert Crisp. He was a tank officer um, in the British Army, and he served in North Africa. And really, and his unit used M3 Honeys, which is a light tank, very small, very cramped. If you've been around M3 or M5 Stuarts, very cramped, small, light reconnaissance tank. Um, And it was interesting how he would talk about during their advances, when this desert would get churned up, you could barely see inside the tank, never mind in front of you.
Hmm.
You were always up with your head in the cupola looking out over. And because the crew quarters were so cramped, he would kick his driver to tell him which way to turn. Like he would kick him on the left for the left turn, kick him on the right for the right turn, kick him in the center of the back to go center. And I forgot but I mean, it was really interesting to see that. And that is just part and parcel of this longer campaign. When you think about that seesawing effect, or the Germans attacking and the Allies falling back, and then the Allies attack. But it doesn't give you that man in the ring kind
No.
of view like that book did. And I remember, because we were setting up the pod, and I remembered that book, and I said, and I looked for it forever. I thought I still had it, but I didn't. So I went and bought it. It's coming. It should be here next week. But I
Amazing.
absolutely recommend that book for that intimate view of what a British tanker went through. I mean, he talks about you could scald your hand on the armor of the tank getting out, and like all these other little things, like
Yeah.
you know, all these little idiosyncrasies that British tankers developed in fighting in the desert. And just an amazing book. So I do recommend it. And we
I
talked
bet
about
though.
we were going to
Yeah.
talk about books, but that one just popped out in my memory for some reason.
Yeah. And like, so you talk about conditions. I bet they were horrific. Um, in the 40s. I mean, having done Afghanistan briefly in the blazing sun, that was horrific as it was. And we had, I was there for a winter tour. I sort of caught the back end or the front end of the summer. And that was horrific in terms of heat. Just everything was dirty, everything was dusty. So going back 80, well, at the time, about 70 years ago, even worse because things are probably not involved in terms of technology or what they've got available, etc. Obviously you talk about logistics, that's really important, for an army, in terms of, being operational. So one of the things that, the Brit or the British or the Aussies did in this is what I read is that they stole, well, they recouped what they found from the Germans,
Liberated,
liberated, yeah, sort of fuel, vehicle, ammo, food,
acquired.
acquired, until Tobruk, they were, so you get until they were able to seize the port of Tobruk. If that's right. Again, please correct me if I'm my notes, but yeah, that's why Tobruk was so important because it was a
Yeah.
way, it was a supply line. It was the largest uh, uh, CD port, port for deep sea.
Yep.
So and it was a gateway as well to Australia. So that's why it was really important, certainly. So yeah, I'm not going to get into logistics. That's a whole nother study period there. But logistics
It's
are really important when it comes to. So when they talk about seizing ports on movies or film, on TV shows or books, it's because logistics is, to seize a port, it's really important. And
yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen, and
We
you'd have
see
seen
we
yourself, Joe.
we see that later on in 44 when Eisenhower orders Montgomery to seize Antwerp, uh, and they do, but they can't open the port because they haven't cleared the Scheldt yet. I mean,
Hmm.
that port was vital, but without the Scheldt being cleared, you couldn't risk running,
Yeah,
Liberty ships down to the port. But we see in late 44 how the Allied advance stalls because of logistics. I mean, it's not a sexy topic like talking about um, the Battle of Bloody Gulch when, you know, Easy Company's banging away at the Germans on the other side of the Gulch and then the attacks and all that stuff. It's not as sexy and intimate as that those fights that really drive emotion and interest. But without logistics, you can't conduct operations.
no,
So,
and
and that's the importance of O'Connor's decision is to seize as they're leapfrogging past Bardia. Um, they have to get to Tobruk because they were also starting to run out of the supplies they seized from the Italians prior to that action at Tobruk. So they
mhm,
need it, like you said. Without the supply, they can't keep the campaign going.
mhm,
So you know, again,
yeah,
not as a thrilling topic, but it is something that's important because it shows you um, outside of the very tactical view of how a battle works, but it shows you the longer operational and strategic view of how a battle works and how they keep a campaign going. But
yeah,
yeah, the logistics without it, they couldn't keep the campaign going.
absolutely. And I think I'm not sure if I'm following following onto this correctly. Obviously, the siege of Tobruk. So obviously that defense, because obviously the Germans wanted that port as well. So obviously they pounded the Australians, pounded them. And I've got a wonderful quote here of what they were called, sort of, or what they were referred as. So let me just see if I've got this. Oh, they saw it as so they got the nickname the Rats of Tobruk, first of all. And so when they were forced to dig in under that constant barrage from the Germans, Lord Haw, hope I said that right, said they were caught like rats in a trap. So like anything, probably like much like the Marines, the US Marines in 1918 in World War One. Um, there was sort of a propaganda element there, and you adopt to become, I think you call yourself devil dogs. Is
Yep.
that right?
Yep.
So the Australians, rats in a trap. So they were the rats of Tobruk, and they used that as a sort of defiant badge of pride, and they became the rats of Tobruk. And what they did was they would scurry out, and they would go out and disrupt the enemy, and that is what they did. They were rats. That's why I sort of refer to as, they literally became rats in what they did. So where, propaganda can work, in one or two ways. And in one sense, I think it worked in the completely opposite way, and it sort of fired up the Aussies.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
and
and you need to have that morale uptick because they were in a terrible situation. Thankfully, um, the Allied Navy, especially the British Navy, could keep the Mediterranean clear, so at
mm,
least the cargo ships could get in and offload and keep them supplied. But the supplies that are coming through are minimal still. I mean, these guys are down to less than a gallon of water a day for drinking, washing, bathing, etc., cleaning anything, clothing or your body. They're stuck eating bully beef and hardtack biscuits. Um,
And I think that's where sort
it's
of water
very,
becomes
very rough on them, even though, um, you know, that badge of honor did work to help keep morale up. But, you're
absolutely.
battling the elements, you're battling the Germans. Um,
And that's where
yeah,
obviously, you talk about water there being, that's what sort of gets prioritized, isn't it? So, using my own experience, well, I'll say, a couple of days where I had to go out and water was a priority, it was rationed. So there was times where you didn't have to shave. I thought this was great. But obviously 'cause they needed it for water. They needed it for drinking. So, and that's what probably happened here as well. And I'd love to, I'd have to do some more digging on this and have a look at the photos of the guys because I find that absolutely fascinating. But going back to that, in terms of the defense, so one thing I came across was Morsehead's policy. So the Australian commander, or the Major General Morsehead, his policy was active defense. So, sometimes, in a lot of things, they say the best form of defense is offense. So probably that's for one way of doing this. So, yes, they were defending, but they were being offensive in how they were defending in terms of disrupting the enemy. And it's actually fascinating. And certainly, I'm going to have to check out World of War. And hopefully, if I've got a bit of time, I mean, I'm not make any promises, but hopefully I can, get a bit of a snippet of that O'Connor video and either put it on our YouTube or certainly put it on, for the patrons to listen to as well. Because I think I'm really interested to listen to that as well. And I didn't even think about watching World of War when I was
yeah.
researching this. Might have made things a lot easier, but it's a great reference point right there. But yeah, and you go back to the Australians as well. And I think one thing with the Australians, they've got a wicked sense of humor. Having met some and having watched comedy shows of them, they've got a brilliant sense of humor, probably better than the Brits. And they got this, the qualities are like, it's a mateship, and I think you could probably call it comradeship with everything like that.
Yeah.
Any person, you could probably relate that to Easy Company, what you see, when things are tough, that comradeship kicks in, that mateship, that's probably the Australian term of it. And humor and endurance is what I came across as well. So
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's, you know, kind of a standard thing for most
I think
servicemen.
it is,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure you had it with your mates when you were downrange. I definitely had it with my guys, although I was a bit older than most of them, um, being their staff sergeant. When you're not as close to them because you're not one. There's a difference in rank and there's a difference in age as well. So, but I thought we got along really well and we looked out for each other and you know that's how you get through the tough times, right?
Absolutely.
But
I think
that's
that's
probably
anything in
also
life,
why
yeah.
why soldiers are scarred so badly, or Marines or Air Force, whoever you are. If you're involved in that intimate kind of contact and you lose people, that's probably a big contributor to the PTSD issues that we have these
Yeah.
days, and amongst other things. But I think we've kind of beaten Tobruk to death at this
I think so
point. I
without
did.
making, well, yeah, so just in case we make any more mistakes or get
No,
caught out on something. But
but
I
I
think
think
it's
I think we did a pretty good job of covering the big pieces, and then we had a few of those little details that kind of draw the story out a little bit, make it more relatable. I cracked me up about those comments about wearing the Italian kit and losing the discipline, and that can be a relevant
big thing,
thing.
huge.
It's just some stuffy officer standing at a distance, saying, "Oh, I don't like them being,
Yeah.
running around acting like the fool."
But what they're probably
Um,
doing is creating bonds, believe it or not. They're probably
and
building, that mateship.
alleviating stress,
Absolutely.
by
There's nothing
clowning
else to
around
do.
or whatever.
Absolutely. And if there's a video called not World of War, sorry, The War, um, BBC. So if you could put BBC, The War, Welsh Guards, Afghanistan. I think it's called Lost Platoon, the actual, so The War, Lost Platoon, I think it's called. And they do stuff like that. They're in this, this checkpoint or they're in this checkpoint. It's like a little castle fought in middle of Afghanistan. And what they do, man, yes, they had an officer, they had a platoon commander there, if any senior officer saw what they were doing, they show her on the documentary, and it's that clowning around and then doing some horrific
Yeah,
stuff. But it's, believe it or not, it's creating that bond, between the
yeah,
ranks, alleviating that stress. So as long as they do the job, not do what you want, but certainly entertain, and that's what they're doing, entertaining themselves. That's exactly what they're doing. And if you watch that documentary, it's you see exactly the same thing to a degree, not without wearing enemy uniform, but certainly doing some things you probably find really, really bizarre. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's
I know
interesting.
for a fact I used to let my guys like clown around a little bit, but they knew when I pulled on that string that it was time back to do business.
Mm,
They were pretty good. But yeah, you can't take away the any of the stress reducers, but you got to moderate it a little bit to keep
yeah,
guys focused. So guys and
absolutely.
gals focused. So I understand completely, but I absolutely love that passage. It just cracked me up when I was reading it. And for those of you that are wondering what the heck I'm talking about, um, the Australians produced their own history of the Battle of Tobruk. It's available online at the Australian National Archives, if I'm correctly. But we'll have the link available for those that want to go check it out. It is really an interesting read. It gives you a much more tactical view of the fight, um, and a lot more interesting anecdotes for those of you who are interested in looking at it. Um, and I think we can segue nicely into our talk for our Easy Company and Band of Brothers fans. We can talk about Don a little bit, Don Malarkey.
Absolutely.
Um, like you said, Don's books and Don himself are probably one of your favorites. I think you
Hmm.
told me.
Absolutely. His book, I read his book in 2009. I was a little bit late to that. But certainly in the show, I loved his character. I mean, I've met Scott Grimes and he's wonderful. He really is a wonderful person. And I loved his character development. He's a fantastic actor anyway. But you see, for me, it's sort of you really see him come to, I think, maturity and call it the back end of seven, certainly eight. This is my opinion. Again, it's what I think. I think you should really see him develop, coming from this young, naive, happy-go-lucky guy, you know, probably not caring the world to everything's on his shoulders. In episode 8, he's just tired. He's matured.
Yeah.
He's grown up, and I think he's yeah. I think he's probably got and I think he's got the best story arc in the show. I've always said that, and I stand by it still.
Yeah. Don is always been a favorite. I got to spend quite a bit of time with him. Um, much more introspective than some of the other guys, and obviously very, as we talked about in the pre-show, an emotional guy. He always would tell me, "I'm Irish. I'm emotional. I cry. It's what I do." Um, a wonderful singer, even though he probably would tell you I'm not a good singer, but I love to sing. Um, but I got to spend quite a bit of time with him. One time we were at the Reading Air Show. I was reenacting at the time. I don't do it anymore because I'm old and bald and fat. But Don was visiting us, and we were looking at pictures of the men, the real men of Easy Company, and there was a shot, and some people might not find this story very funny or whatever, but I thought it was an interesting story because there's multiple layers to it. But anyway, Don is looking at this picture, and there's a picture of him. For those of you who saw the advert for the pod, there's a picture of Don with Floyd Talbot, and if you look at Tab, he is wearing his Class Bs. According to Don, that day that picture was taken, Floyd had come into the barracks or the house where they were staying, and he basically said, "I've got to go on a mission, a secret mission for the Major, Winters." And Floyd disappears for a few hours, and then he comes back, and they're all like, "What were you doing? What were you doing?" So apparently Floyd, you know, told them what he was out doing. And as Don is looking at me as he's telling the story, I could see like the wheels are turning. He's becoming a little bit more introspective about what he is telling me. And he reaches out, he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, I don't know if I should tell this story. And I'm going, well, what could this be about that he's hesitant to tell me? I mean, because Don had never been shy about telling me any story at that point. And I'm like, and and he quickly changes the subject because there's that famous picture in the book. I had other 506 men in there as well. And one of them was the famous picture of Bob Nudie from Fox Company. For the folks who are unfamiliar with that photo, it's the famous one of him on D-Day Eve sitting in his C-47, and he has his bazooka in front of him, and he's holding the Eisenhower letter that he had just gotten done reading. And he goes, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "I think I know who it is, but I might be wrong." And he goes, "That's Bob Nudie." And I said, "From Fox Company?" He goes, "Yes. He and I went through NCO school together in 1945." And then he said, "I haven't seen Bob since the war." do you know that that photo is on the cover of, I think he said the Air Force magazine. And at the time I was working out of the Pentagon. So I went down to the Pentagon archives way after the event. And I said, he goes, I would love to talk to Bob if we could ever find him. So the first thing and he goes, and so I said, well, you know what I'll do is I'll go into the archives in the Pentagon, see if they've got a copy of the magazine and make a copy of it and send it to him because he obviously doesn't have it. So I find it on microfiche, I print it out, and I send it to Don with a note saying, hey, I'm going to start looking for Bob. I'll get back with you. And he writes me back a letter, and all's cool in school. And it takes a couple of weeks, but I finally locate Bob Nudie and I call him up and I introduce myself. I give him my background and he's like, oh, well, it's really nice to talk to you. Another service member, especially serving now. And I was like, yeah, yes, sir. And don't call me, please don't call me sir. Bob was the sweetest guy you'd ever meet. One of the greatest human beings I've ever had the pleasure of associating with. And I said, I'm in contact with Don Malarkey. And I was like, do you remember? He goes, of course I remember Don. Would it be okay to give Don your phone number? And he's like, sure. So, oh, Don had written in his response letter to me, hey, if you give me a call, we'll talk about that Tab's secret mission. So I was like, okay, I got to get to the bottom of that story, but I also want to hook him up with Bob. So I call up Don, I give him Bob's number. He hangs up. I don't know, half an hour goes by. Bob calls me up. Thank you so much. It was so great for talking to Don. I hadn't talked to him since 45. He hangs up 5 minutes later, same call from Don. And I'm like, Don, by the way, I wanted to ask you about that secret mission, the Tab. And he just keeps going on about Bob. And I had to get back to the office. And I was like, okay, Don, I'm going to call you up another time. And I want to get to the bottom of the story. And he's like, okay, yeah. He's so excited about talking to Bob. And the next time I call Don up, all he can talk about is Bob again. And I can't get a word in edgewise. And then he hangs up again. And then I filed it away in you'll catch up with him another time. And I never did. So unfortunately, the secret mission story, I never found out what it was. It's this thing that hangs. And it's like one of the only times one of the men told me about something that I couldn't get the full story about.
Yeah.
So it kind of hangs out there, but it's still a fun story in that there's still unknown history about this company that might be the most widely written about
Hmm.
company in the entire war.
Yeah.
And I still love that there's still a mystery out there about these guys that didn't get told. Um, and then Bob, by the way, God bless him. I contacted him later on and I said, can I get you to sign that famous photograph? And I sent it to him and he signs it and he sends it back and he says, forever in your debt on it. And those are the moments when you think about, your relationship with these men and the things that you
Hmm.
do for them. And it just knocks your socks off that you're able to associate with them and talk with them. And that's, talking
Absolutely.
with you, part of the reason why I wanted to do the podcast was because they're pretty much all gone. And
Hmm.
I want at least the ones that I was close with, and I want to talk about them and tell the stories that they told me.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have talked about um, you wanting to hear a lot of those stories, and I figured, what better way to do it be the two of us to talk together and tell those stories for everybody else. So, um, yeah, uh,
Absolutely. And
love those
so,
guys, and they're just irreplaceable
I mean,
personalities.
absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. There's a Facebook group um online. There's a Facebook group, sorry, about Band of Brothers, and this some of these people are putting out some incredible photos. There's certainly one of there's always more history. It was what you said, probably a great word there. A couple of words there. Somebody put a photo up of Lewis Nixon as a child. Wow. That's just phenomenal straight off the bat to be able to find that. I mean, whether they've got it from somebody else or they've done their own research. Wow, it's still wow to see that yeah, it's they're not just Band of Brothers, they're not just Easy Company. That these are people, and I think Netflix, being it on Netflix, and I've heard from a very good source that the Pacific's doing better than Band of Brothers on Netflix. But I think that's a great thing. 'Cause I love the Pacific, and I like like think down the line we'll get Henry Sledge on to talk about his father's book, with the Old Breed. But I do think it's so a lot of these young people these days they watch Netflix, so I like to think that's a good thing. Is going to, people are going to get into it, and hopefully, if it just catches one person, I think it's done its job in terms of doing what they can to, to remember these people, not just, the members of Easy Company, but I think, the whole people who served in that time. Um, I think it's just a one, it's a new audience, when we watched the show, I mean, I watched on, the BBC. I can't remember if it was BBC One or BBC Two when it first aired. Like, I can't remember that, but it captured me. And yes, I was always interested in World War Two growing up, but I think, you know, Band of Brothers certainly it was like I've heard it described as a gateway drug for people into getting into World War Two history. And I think I certainly lit a match under it for me. Lit a fire, sorry, under it for me. And in terms of really getting into it, really reading up into it. I mean, what you said earlier as well about the Vietnam books, the paperbacks. Well, I had to. So first of all, I went on this, Band of Brothers Easy Company sort of, you know, journey, and realized I can't keep on reading about Easy Company. There were other companies in the war. There were other
Yeah.
division. That was one thing, and I dipped into a little bit of Black Hawk Down and some of the books around that. But then I went into those, Vietnam books. The 101st, the U.S. Marines. I was utterly fascinated by them. And there's a chap, oh, I can't remember his name. He was 101st LRRP.
Yeah, Gary,
Um,
Gary Linder.
that's the one.
Yeah.
And I've got a few of his books, and they were incredible, and I love their stories as well, and I had the absolute honor to meet somebody who fought in Vietnam last month, and I got him to sign my, well, actually, I say sign my, I bought it in preparation for meeting him, who fought in, X-ray, we were soldiers, and I bought a first edition really cheaply, so I was really happy with that. Or, and I got him to sign it, and we spent a good hour, probably more than an hour, actually chatting, and it was just fascinating to hear these. And I like to think people, will remember what the people of Vietnam. I'm not going to get into that actually, but what these
Yeah.
people do, because whether it's, and it's really interesting when you speak to these people who have served, and where they've served as well, and the stories that they have. It's just phenomenal. You could, like, I could have sat there all night. Well, I was probably most night listening to him. I could have, sat there listening to him for days. He's just fascinating. And obviously yourself with the members of Easy Company and beyond as well. It's just, I didn't have that, growing up. I mean, I was in a library when I was probably 14, 15, maybe, probably younger, using the internet down there when it was, because not everyone had it in their house. And I remember sitting next to a guy who was a Lancaster, I think he was a tail gunner at the time. And I just thought, oh, that's amazing. I can't remember how we came across that. He was just an old boy. And man, I wish I'd go back and go talk to him a little bit more, find out who he is, find out his name,
Yeah, I
find out.
think from when I was growing up, the Vietnam guys were my dad is a Vietnam era veteran of the Air Force. So I there were a lot of Vietnam veterans around at the time. So I got a chance to talk to a lot of them. But to revisit your gateway drug um, comment when it comes to World War II um, movies and television, like I said, for me it was The Longest Day and Kelly's Heroes, and I think for
Mhm,
another the next kind of leapfrog to that would be like my friend John Primerano. He was with the field wire platoon of the 501st, and John always said Battleground is his
it's a
favorite.
great film.
He said
Brilliant.
it's the most accurate look of at Bastogne in terms of weather and the impact on the soldiers who are fighting. So you have like movies like that, but I think for the next generation after, like mine would have been Saving Private Ryan, and then you have Band, and then you have the
Mhm,
Pacific, and soon to be the Masters of the Air. I think your comment out the Pacific and the viewership on Netflix. I think what's happening is a lot of folks who were Band fans thought the Pacific was going to be Band 2, and we're just a little bit disenchanted with it because it didn't flow like Band of Brothers did, because they chose to focus
mhm,
on the three major personalities. And but for Marine, and I've had conversations with John Seda and a couple of the other actors, and I said,
mhm,
especially Scotty Gibson, who
mhm.
is
Friend of ours. Yeah,
absolutely love Ack. We'll have him on at some point.
absolutely.
And I told him, I said, the thing about the Pacific for me is I'm a Marine. This is our history. Are there some liberties taken? Sure, there was liberties taken in Band. There will undoubtedly be liberties taken, creative liberties taken in Masters. It's not a documentary. It's entertainment that is based on a true story.
Yeah,
But for me, I absolutely love the Pacific. I'm glad to see it getting some viewership love. I think what's happening is people who didn't really give it a chance the first time around are giving it a
yeah,
chance now. And not only that, you can sit there and kind of watch it over and over again because Netflix makes it so available to do so.
Yeah,
And I think it's fine. It's finding that love, um, a little late, but it's finding it, and I'm glad to see it because there really are some outstanding performances in that. And like I said, I absolutely love Scott's performance in it for on so many
hmm,
levels.
yeah,
And you could tell that Dale and Mike Stokey and Freddie Joe did a
yeah.
fantastic job in training
Well,
him.
I think that, and I've spoken to Freddie about this a number of times, is, and obviously their cadre was all Marines, and one or two of them were, he has told me the names, oh gosh, I can't remember his name now. But, they were all, and I think one or two of them were serving at the time. They basically, got special dispensation to go and do that, and like what you just said, it's your history, it's their history. So I think obviously it's a little bit different to Band of Brothers for, Dale, Stokey, Freddie. Um, this is their history. So if they get this wrong, I mean, they'd probably be hated by the US
Oh
Marines,
yeah,
the corps, but so probably a little bit, more. And we can always, when we get Freddie on, down the line, we can always pick his brains on this. But he would have got probably stoned if if they messed that up in terms, but they're very good as it is. They're all pretty excellent. Obviously, Dale's involved with, Masters of the Air with Stokey. That'd be really interesting, and maybe when when that drops, we'll chat about it. And I'm really nervous. Although the reviews I'm seeing, it's very good, and I've seen one particular reviewer say that it's better than Band of Brothers, and this is a good guy. He's a historian, so that's a pretty big statement to make.
yeah. That's tough to make it. I mean, we can't make a qualified statement as of yet. I mean, it
No.
looks. A couple of the early trailers came out. Some of the CGI looked a little dodgy, but overall, it looks very beautifully shot.
Mm,
And
looks incredible.
I do
And
like that line from what's the kid's name who played
oh,
Elvis?
Austin,
Austin. And
Austin
he
Butler.
says, first time in the sawmill, boys. To me, that is just this is going to be a kick in the gut ride.
Mm,
So I'm looking forward to it. My paternal grandfather was an armorer in a B-24 squadron in the Pacific, so I have a bit of an affinity for the bomber squadrons, a bit of love for them. And my paternal grandfather was a I mean, my maternal grandfather was a plank holder on the USS Ticonderoga, and they were kamikaze during the Battle of Formosa. So there's a lot of Pacific history in my family, less so the Western Europe. But
mhm.
Western Europe, I think we'll be leaning in that direction quite a bit. But we're going to be quite organic, I think, as we go along the lifeline of the podcast in terms of
Yeah.
the topics that we discuss and the folks that we bring on. It'll be fairly eclectic, like we talked about, right? We'll have
Mhm.
historians, we'll have authors, we'll have folks who work in the film
Yeah.
industry, and we'll have family members that come on and talk about
I mean, with that in
their
mind, what you
family
just said
members.
then, you've already had a pretty big yes from, without even asking, from one of the writers from Band of Brothers,
Yeah,
Eric
executive
Jenderson.
producer and writer Eric Jendronson has already told me, "Hey, I'm available when you need me," which will be great to have
And you didn't even ask him.
EJ. Yeah, I didn't even ask him; he
Yeah,
piped
we
up.
spoke. It's like he read our mind. Like we spoke about it previously. It's like he read our mind, and he's a great speaker as well. He's fantastic. Having
Wonderful.
met
I had a
him, yeah, he's brilliant.
great personal relationship with the major as well, so a lot of insights there for
Yeah,
the folks who are fans of band and the Easy
absolutely.
Company. But
S-
I think, do we want a quick plug on some of the books I know you
Oh,
put you had your Rommel book up.
so I can't get into that. I'd love to. I mean, there's a few other things. I
uh,
mean, I'll give us a quick plug at the moment. I mean, obviously
I got
because
one right here that if everybody's interested in reading, I have to say, Paul Woody, thank you for recommending Alan's book, Browned Off and Bloody Minded. Um, with regard to our Tobruk portion of the show today, there's a great section here about the British Army serving in North Africa. Really gives you a good feel about what they were dealing with and attitudes between the men on the fighting line and the rear echelon folks. There was definitely a great difference between um, the suffering of the two and their opinions of the other ones being that suffering. It was not universal suffering, and a lot of these guys, there was some resentment, but more than that, dealing with the environment more than just dealing with the fighting the Italians and Germans. All the things we talked about, like the flies, eating bully beef 17 days in a row, like all those kind of things that um, made it difficult on the boys that were fighting over there. Highly recommend it. It talks about how the UK ramped up their recruitment, how they had to change their recruiting style to get a different caliber of folks, how to open up their officer training program to a wider pool of bodies so they get more quality folks that might not had university time but still
Mhm.
showed a lot of leadership promise. So really good book. If you get your mitts on it, I guarantee you'll enjoy it if you like that kind of thing where you look at a case study about the development of soldiers, especially the British soldiers in World War II, which is, in my mind, very underwritten about and underappreciated. Um, and yeah, did you have anything you wanted to plug?
Oh yeah, so sorry, I didn't see it up. I've got my black on. Damn lucky.
Oh,
Um, oh,
blurry.
blurry. So damn
Right.
lucky if so it's about John Luckadoo, who's one of the pilots in the 100th Bomb Group. Obviously the 100th Bomb Group is obviously Masters of the Air. That's who they depict in Masters of the Air. And so a big thank you to Matthew Mabe for sending me this. Matt was one of the military historians for Masters of the Air, and we built up a great friendship, through something else. But and he was doing an event with Lucky back in November. And I asked him if he could do me an absolute solid and get me Lucky's autograph just on a business card or a bit of paper or a napkin, just something, because he was escorting him at an event in Washington. And he did one better and, you know, got me a book. He gave me a book. And I'm speaking to Matt at the moment. I'm looking at doing something. So a little bit of a plug, with so going back to currahee signings, is I'm speaking with Matt, with the potential of doing quite a few of the Masters of the Air actors, private signings with those. I've spoken to Matt about the idea of raising some money for the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. And he thinks it's a great idea. Obviously, he's going to do some checks to see if it's okay. I'm sure it'll be fine. Either way, I'm going to donate money to the 100th Bomb Group Foundation from it, so he hasn't got a choice in that.
Well,
But how we do it is certainly, an idea. I'm bouncing around with him at the moment. So yeah,
so
huge thanks. And it's a great book, and he was a pilot in the 100th. So like I says, I've got a lot going on, but certainly when I go away, we'll work a lot. This is, I'm certainly taking away with me this week about it's his journey and becoming a B-17 pilot in World War II and beyond. So, and within that, so I'm really enjoying it so far. Like I said, I can't go too deep into it at the moment because I'm not that deep into it, just for a number of reasons. But I've picked it back up again, and yeah, that's my book.
well, is the series dropping or first episodes dropping on the 26th?
I think it's the first two episodes.
First two episodes, they'll do kind of like what they did with Band and drop two at a time,
I think it's the same with the Pacific as
or
well.
just the first two, and then it'll go to single episodes after that.
Yeah, I think that's
Anyway,
yeah.
what we could do is, so this pod will drop on the 31st. I think that's the plan, right?
Hmm.
That's what we've adverted. So I guess we ought to stick to this schedule. Maybe Matt wants to come on in a subsequent show and talk Masters with us, and
Absolutely.
especially with with the series dropping soon. He'll probably want to come on and maybe hopefully come on and plug and talk about his role as an advisor, a military advisor and
That'd be
historian,
fantastic.
and
Yeah,
I think that would be a win if Matt wants to do that. But we don't really have we'll be dropping another advert at some point after this one releases with our the next scheduled stuff, whether it's going to be a guest speaker, a guest on the show, more books to plug, topics du jour, and then some Easy Company history to go along with it, and then we'll start developing when we want to do our Band of Brothers episodic reviews and myth busting. But there's lots to come. This is just episode one, and I got to tell you, I'm very excited, and
me
I'm
too.
glad to be doing this with you, and I'm glad that for everyone who takes the time to watch or listen. So, on behalf of the two of us, thanks
Thank you very
again, and
much.
we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening.